You know, when a new life-saving medicine gets approved in Europe, you think patients could get it almost right away, but that's not what happens. It can take over a year and a half. So there's this massive new EU regulation, the Joint Clinical Assessment, that promises to fix all this. But the big question is, will it actually shorten the race to get these medicines to the patient? We're about to break it all down. Okay, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at the problem. Why is patient access so painfully slow? Then we'll dig into the EU's big solution, the Joint Clinical Assessment, or JCA for short. After that, we'll see how this creates a totally new kind of race for drug makers. And finally, we'll get to the bottom line. Does this new process actually live up to its promise? All right, so first things first. We have to set the stage and really understand why this huge overhaul was even necessary. And really, the core problem boils down to two things: a whole lot of time and a whole lot of inequality. Just look at this number, 578 days. I mean, that is the staggering average time it takes for a newly approved, innovative medicine to actually become available to patients somewhere in the EU. Think about that. That's more than a year and a half of waiting, after all the science has already said the drug is safe and it works. And you know, it's not just a waiting game. It's basically a postcode lottery. This chart just lays it bare. Your access to a new drug completely depends on where you live. So if you're in Germany, you've got access to almost 90% of new medicines. But then you look over at Lithuania, and it's a shocking 10%. The EU average? It's less than half. It's a clear sign of a system that is just deeply, deeply fragmented. So to try and fix this broken, slow system, the EU came up with the Joint Clinical Assessment, the JCA. The whole goal here is to harmonize one absolutely critical part of the process for every single member state. The idea at its core is actually pretty simple, but it's also really powerful. Let's stop doing 27 separate national clinical reviews. Instead, let's create one unified scientific assessment. This single report is supposed to be the common starting point for every country when they start making their decisions. Okay, now this right here is probably the most critical distinction in this whole thing. The JCA is only about the clinical science. That means, does the drug work? Is it safe compared to what's already out there? It has absolutely nothing to do with the money side of things, the cost, the price, or reimbursement. That power, that stays firmly with each individual country. And this isn't all just happening overnight. It's a phased rollout. It kicks off in January 2025, and they're starting with the most complex and high-need areas, so new cancer drugs and advanced therapies. Then in 2028, it'll expand to include orphan drugs for rare diseases. And by 2030, every single centrally approved medicine will have to go through this JCA process. So what does this actually look like in practice? Well, this new system basically creates a parallel track that runs right alongside the main regulatory approval. And what that does is set up a brand new race for drug manufacturers. The moment a company applies for approval from the European Medicines Agency, bam, a second clock starts ticking for the JCA. As you can see, this new process runs in parallel. It involves finalizing the scope, submitting a massive dossier, and drafting a report, all perfectly timed to be published right as the drug gets its official green light. This kind of synchronization, it's a huge change from how things used to be. At the heart of this whole assessment is something called the PICO framework. Now, to create one report that's actually useful for all 27 countries, the PICO has to define the patients, the new drug, and the outcomes. But here's the tricky part. It also has to define the comparators. And since the standard treatment is different in Spain than it is in Poland, the JCNA has to consider a huge range of them, and that makes the evidence you need to provide incredibly complex. And there it is, the deadline. Once that super complex PICO scope is finalized, manufacturers have just 100 days. That's it, 100 days to prepare and submit their massive, multifaceted JCA dossier. That is an extremely tight window to pull together all this data, potentially even new analyses for dozens of different scenarios. Yeah, and this quote from an industry leader really gets to the heart of the frustration. The big hope was that the JCA would replace 27 different processes. But the reality, at least for now, is that it feels like an extra layer of work that's just been piled on top of everything else. Because all those local pricing requirements, they're not going anywhere. So this brings us to the most important question, right? Will this new high-pressure process actually do what it's supposed to do? Will it lead to faster, more equitable patient access? Well, let's take a look at the promise versus the reality. On paper, the opportunities are pretty clear. Long-term, having one assessment instead of 27, that should be more efficient. It could be a huge help for smaller EU countries that just don't have the resources to do these reviews quickly. And it also forces better collaboration inside the companies themselves. So that's the promise. But the reality on the ground? It's a lot more challenging. For one, the system is brand new, so nobody really knows exactly how it's going to work out. There's a big risk that the final JCA report might not be what, say, France or Italy actually needs for their local process. And here's the kicker. Many countries haven't even said how they plan to use the report, which creates a huge investment risk for the companies making these drugs. And that leads us to this idea of the Delta dossier. This is really where the promise of ending duplication crashes into the hard reality of market access. So after that single clinical assessment is done, companies still have to go and prepare 27 different supplemental packages. These are filled with all the economic, cost-effectiveness, and budget data that each country demands before they'll even talk about price. And this table really shows us where the real bottleneck has always been. It's not the clinical review. The biggest delay, a median 407 days, happens after the drug is already approved. It's during those national pricing and reimbursement negotiations, and that is the one part of the process the JCAA was specifically designed not to touch. Which leaves us with this one final critical question. The JCA absolutely creates a single unified starting line for this race, but it leaves all the biggest hurdles, the individual pricing and reimbursement decisions in every single country, still on the track. So while the start of the race is cleaner, it's far from clear if it will actually help patients get to the finish line any faster.